Have you ever met someone who just seemed older than they should be? Not in the way they looked, in the way they carried themselves. The way they never asked for help. The way they stayed calm when everything around them wasn't. The way they somehow always knew what needed to be done. And just did it. Nobody taught them that. Life did. Psychology calls this growing up too fast. And it doesn't happen loudly. There's no single moment, no announcement. It happens quietly, gradually, until one day a child looks around and realizes someone has to hold this together, and decides it might as well be them. 1. They became strong because weakness wasn't allowed. Psychologists have a name for what happens when a child is given adult responsibilities before they're ready. Parentification. It looks different in every family. Sometimes it's emotional. A child who becomes the person their parent vents to, leans on, depends on. Sometimes it's practical. Cooking, managing the house, taking care of siblings. But underneath all of it, the psychological impact is the same. The child's brain adapts. It learns to suppress its own needs. It learns to stay calm, stay useful, stay composed. And slowly, it learns something devastating. That their feelings come last. They weren't born with that strength. They built it because there was no other option. Because someone had to. And no one else was going to. 2. They stopped asking. And eventually stopped expecting. Developmental psychology shows something important about children who grow up without consistent support. They stop reaching for it, not because they don't need it, but because experience taught them that reaching leads to disappointment, that comfort is unreliable, that it's safer to handle things alone than to hope someone shows up and be wrong. So they become self-sufficient, impressively so. And as adults, people look at them and see capability. Composure. Someone who always figures it out. What they don't see is the person who genuinely doesn't know how to let someone else carry something for them. Not because they're too proud. Because trust feels like a risk their nervous system isn't sure they can afford. 3. They grew up in some ways, and stayed young in others. This is one of the most painful parts of growing up too fast. The development doesn't happen evenly. Certain parts mature early. The responsibility, the emotional awareness, the ability to read a room instantly and know exactly what's needed. But other parts, the parts that needed safety to grow, they stayed behind. So you get someone who can manage a crisis without flinching, but struggles to identify what they actually feel. Someone wise beyond their years, but quietly confused about why they feel so empty when everything looks fine. They grew up before they got to learn how to need people safely, and that gap follows them quietly into adulthood. 4. Rest never felt safe, so they never learned how to. Think about what rest felt like in that house. Calm moments didn't always mean safe moments. Sometimes the quiet was just a pause before something went wrong. Sometimes stillness meant something was being missed. Something was about to fall apart. So the nervous system stayed alert, always scanning, always preparing, always ready. And as adults, they feel productive only when they're needed, comfortable only when they're useful. The moment things slow down, something inside them gets uneasy. Psychology links this directly to chronic stress adaptation in childhood. Their nervous system learned that rest was a luxury it couldn't trust. And even now, in a safe life, in a quiet room, with nothing actually wrong, it still doesn't fully believe that. 5. They carry everyone, and quietly fall apart alone. Here is something most people never see about someone who grew up too fast. They are extraordinarily good at holding others together. They show up, they listen, they carry weight without complaining. But when it comes to their own needs, they minimize them, they apologize for them. They feel guilty for having them at all. Because somewhere early in life, a belief got planted deep, that needing something means burdening someone, that asking for support is selfish, that depending on another person is a weakness they cannot afford. So receiving care feels wrong. Unfamiliar, almost suspicious, not because they don't want it, because part of them never learned that they were allowed to have it. 6. They see everything, and trust almost nobody. Growing up too fast sharpens something in a person. Their emotional radar becomes extraordinary. They notice the slight change in someone's tone. They sense tension before anyone else in the room does. They read people quickly, accurately, and almost involuntarily. But that same awareness comes with a wall, because they also learned early how much it costs to care without protecting yourself, how quickly things shift, how easily people disappoint. So they stay warm enough to connect, but guarded enough to survive it if it falls apart. Not cold, not closed, just careful. Because careful is what kept them safe when nothing else did. If any of this felt familiar, psychology doesn't look at you and see someone broken. It sees someone whose nervous system did exactly what it needed to do to survive. You learned responsibility before you learned safety. You learned strength before you learned softness. You learned how to hold everything together before anyone ever held you. And here is what that means now. The strength was never the problem. The problem is that you're still carrying weight from a house you no longer live in. Healing doesn't mean becoming weak. It means slowly learning something that should have been taught to you a long time ago. that you are finally allowed to rest.